If you or someone you know is struggling with alcoholism or addiction, do not hesitate to reach out for help. You can find numerous free resources on our website, thebeginagainpodcast.com, and there are tons of resources and support networks available online, in person, or just a phone call away. You don't have to face this challenge alone. Welcome to the Begin Again podcast. I'm your host, Gary Menkes. On the Begin Again podcast, we delve into the inspiring journeys of individuals who have overcome alcoholism and addiction and emerged as true trailblazers in entrepreneurship, business, sports, and beyond. Through authentic, uplifting, and profound conversations with our guests, we aim to shatter the stigma surrounding addiction and demonstrate that recovery can be a catalyst for remarkable success, strength, and resilience. We firmly believe that by listening to these accounts, you will be empowered to unlock your own potential, instigate positive change in your life, and contribute to the creation of a better world. So, get ready to be inspired and embark on your own personal journey of growth with the Begin Again podcast. Welcome back to the Begin Again podcast. I'm your host, Gary Menkes, and joining us today is the founder of SoberLifeSchool.com, which specializes in helping busy professional women give up drinking and create a life they love. She's a certified recovery coach and a hypnotist and a host of the award-winning podcast, the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast. Arlina Allen. Arlina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be with you today.
No, same here. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. So let's jump right in. I know we were just talking offline where you grew up. You grew up in California, correct?
I did. Yeah, I grew up in the Silicon Valley area. I felt like I was so lucky to just land there on the planet. It was an amazing place to grow up.
Sure. And so when did addiction or alcoholism, when did that start trickling into your life?
Gosh, you know what? For me, it started really early. I'm the product of divorce, and when there was a couple of things that shaped my early childhood. One was sexual abuse by a neighbor. My parents' divorce was really hard on me, and that created a lot internally within me, around trauma and things like that. And that kind of set the stage for this underlying feeling of me wanting to change how I felt. And the first time I ever drank, it was before I was 10 years old. And my mom divorced my dad when I was about 7. So it was in that time period. But I have an older sister, and she and I were home alone. And I decided it'd be a great idea to drink some of the booze that was in this dusty old bottle in the cabinet. I never saw my parent to drink either one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember. But it certainly wasn't an issue. But I remember that first drink like it was yesterday, the way it burned my lips and the way it burned all the way down. But then, that warmth that spread through my whole body. And what I didn't realize is I didn't realize how bad I felt until I felt really good. Like I hate to say it, but it was like self-loathing and anxiety and, all that was lifted, and the juxtaposition between not feeling good and feeling really good was so, the magnitude was so great. It like burnt, like that experience was like burned in my psyche forever. I obviously didn't become a daily drinker at 9 years old, but I will never forget that feeling of this is my solution.
Sure. Yeah. 9 years old is young.
I know.
Same. I don't know how old exactly I was. I remember, there was, pictures of me drinking a beer out of my dad when I was young, but I don't attribute that to like, oh, look what happened, look at that episode. Like I was alcoholic from the get-go, but kind of similar. We were in grade school. I remember going, my buddy's house, and their parents weren't home yet, and going in their liquor cabinets. And I remember they were like a little further advanced than I was. I was like, oh, this was.
Were they older than you?
A little bit, they were. It's funny, yes, because even they're my best buddies to this day, but they were all like a year and a half older than me. I guess, I don't know. They had late birthdays and they got left back
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they were always a little older than, chasing the older guys is part of my story. As they got a little older, like, a young kid, I couldn't wait to like be able to go to the bars, and I couldn't wait to like, party, like it just, and now I have 2 little ones, and I'm just keeping an eye on them. I'm always like stay where you are. Don't be in such a rush to, to chase adulthood, if you will,
Yeah.
although I didn't become adult until I became sober. I mean, I was, yeah, I didn't realize all this. And you mentioned the internal, conflicts or the anxiety and childhood
Yeah.
trauma. Like these are topics, I wasn't able to articulate that. I didn't realize that I didn't feel comfortable on my own skin, and I
Yeah.
was full of fear and anxiety, and that when I touched alcohol, it made it all go away. I just wasn't able to articulate that until well into recovery and started doing work on myself. But you know,
Yeah.
I'm sure you can relate to that. But so you
No, absolutely. I
said,
mean, that's sort of how it happens, right? Like in the moment, I didn't realize that that's what was going on. But then, looking back, absolutely, I've had a lot of time to sort of reflect on my experiences and looking back. And what my interpretation is, looking back, it's like, yeah, that's what it was. I was like you. I would have all these feelings, especially like early recovery. Remember early recovery where you're just like, I'm having a feeling and I don't know what it is,
oh my
you
God,
know? Yeah.
early recovery, like when you're supposed, I talk about this a lot, a perfect stranger comes and says, "Hey, give me a call tomorrow." It's like every instinct in my being is to like, get away from me, man, and keep your phone number. But it wasn't until like I had this, the gift of surrender, because what I was trying, like I was in and out of the rooms for 4 years. I went to rehab
Oh,
in 2002. My sober date's 2006. So it was 4 years of in and out, and just it was dark. It was difficult. All the sayings,
I get it.
full of booze and a mind full of sobriety is a really difficult place to be. And that
Brutal.
was me. It was like a battle every single day of my life, every day. Didn't even realize it, but that's what it was like.
Yeah, I had 2 years of sort of like from my bottom to before I got into any kind of before I got any kind of help. It
Yeah.
was 2 years of just torture.
So would you talk about your bottom? It's a good topic to talk about sometime.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So
Let's
like I
talk
said,
about our
I wasn't,
bottoms.
what's that?
Let's talk about our bottoms.
Let's talk about the worst thing that ever happened to me. Yeah,
Yeah,
that'll
here it
be fun.
goes.
Well, so yeah, this story of the bottom, like I absolutely had one,
Yeah.
right? I probably have had many, like I've had emotional bottoms in sobriety, but before I got sober, I feel like so my bottom was like, so my sister and I were going out, and I was going out with my older sister because I had kind of burned out all my friends.
Yeah.
Right. They're really like nobody wanted to hang out with me anymore because when I was drinking, I like to say that I had two alter egos when I was drinking. It was either Badass Betsy or Wimpy Wendy because I was either fighting or crying.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like everyone was tired of my shenanigans. And so my circle had become very small, but I still had to go out, right? You don't want to show up at the bar alone because what kind of loser does that?
All right.
Right. So I got my sister, picked her up, we went out, and I got all dolled up because this guy I was seeing, we were supposed to meet up. And he was the best friend of the married policeman I had been dating. I don't know if you
Mhm.
can follow all that, but that's just kind of the kind of girl I was, a hot mess. And but he didn't show up. And I lost my ever loving mind on the way home.
Mm.
So I was already pretty upset that, boyfriend number two didn't show up. And on the way home, we passed boyfriend number one, who had been giving a field sobriety test to somebody. So as we passed him, I just lost my ever loving mind. Apparently, I punched the windshield in a couple places and broke it. And my sister, this is secondhand information because I don't remember a lot of this, but my sister says that I was grabbing the steering wheel and trying to jump out of a moving car. And and by the way, this is my car she was driving. So I was like wrecking my own car. So stupid. And then we got about 2 blocks from the house when apparently I kicked her in the face while she was driving, and she was able to pull the car over, and she had a bloody nose, and we were just down the streets from some childhood friend's house. And they came out, and I just remember bits and pieces. Like I remember seeing that they were twins, these gals that we knew when we were growing up. I don't know if one of them was there or both of them was there. Both of them were there, but one of them was like, and the police were called. I think they were going to take me to jail if I didn't calm down. And one of them looked at me and she was like, "It's not worth it. Don't do it."
Right.
And so for whatever reason, they didn't take me to jail. The next morning, I woke up with I couldn't remember a lot, just bits and pieces, but the guy that was supposed to meet me at the boyfriend number two was there. I didn't remember him coming over, and my hand was black and blue.
Mm.
And I just had that sinking, sickening feeling that something terrible had happened the night before, and I couldn't remember.
Right.
So I called my sister and I went over to her house, with my tail between my legs. And she was so pissed at me. And
Yeah.
she lived with my mom. And I was like, I know she told my mom everything. And I just, I mean, I love my mom and I didn't want her to think bad of me. But I felt so bad because I knew she had told my mom everything.
Right.
And we sat down and she proceeded to tell me like that I completely made an ass of myself at the bar and what had happened on the way home. And it was just, and then that she was going to go to Al-Anon. And this is how crazy I was. I was surprised. I was like a little offended, like, you're going to, because of me,
Right.
you
Right.
know, like, I was clutching my pearls at that point. I was like, what?
Yeah.
It was like I wasn't even aware of how crazy I was. But
Sure.
but that was the day that was my bottom, and that's the day that I began to question my drinking, and I started asking the questions. Am I an alcoholic?
Mm.
When did I cross the line? What about all these other people I'm hanging out with? Are they alcoholic? Like,
Right.
what was different about me? And one question led to another, and these questions sort of moved me forward,
Mhm.
right? Like I began to walk on this path that I didn't know was going to lead me to sobriety.
Mm.
And it took me 2 years of trying to moderate my drinking
Sure.
before I was able to completely surrender to the
Mm.
realization, the reality that I was not one of those people that could moderate.
Yeah.
I just couldn't. I tried all the things and I just couldn't do it. And so I had two clients that were in the program, as we say, in a 12-step program. And one of them took me to my very first meeting, and the other guy was sort of like over time kind of breaking down some of the ideas like, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting. And it was said with such love and compassion. It wasn't,
Right.
and then they would tell their stories about all the horrible things they did and how they got out of it. And that's just kind of how it started. And it was I was so grateful to have a friend to go with to my very first meeting. And these two guys, Mitch and Randy, they were like fine, upstanding men of the program, and they quickly turned me over to the women,
Yeah.
which was terrifying in and of itself because I didn't have great relationships with women. But they
Mm.
were like, if you want to get sober, you need to work with a woman.
Sure.
It's a suggestion. And I was like, I was terrified. But listen, at that point, I was willing to do anything that they told me to do.
Yeah.
So
Well, I've been
yeah,
there too, right? Being willing, whatever it takes, and I said it just, I think a few minutes ago. Yeah. The gift of surrender, like he had said, I came in, like I said, 2002, I was coming off a bender. I went AWOL at my first real job. It was my first Wall Street job. And, I went out on Thursday. Yeah. And I mean, it was the first real job period I've ever had. Like first time, like, I was a career bartender up until this point. Like I had real
perfect.
aspiration. Yeah. Perfect aspirations for a young man, for this guy. That's for sure. And
Yeah.
so, a guy came in, said, "What are you doing here? Come work for me." I work for a Wall Street firm, yada, yada, yada. And I started working at a real firm downtown New York. And yeah, I started there February of '01, and I was 6 blocks north of the World Trade Center of September of '01, and April of '02, I was in upstate New York in a rehab for the first time because I went AWOL. I got a
Oh, yeah.
letter hand delivered to me. It said, "Gary, if you're alive, you need to contact us. Otherwise, your job is terminated." I thought quickly on my feet and I said, "Yeah, I'm alive." And I said, "I have a problem with drinking." I was on a full tear. Like I was on a full blown, like 5-day tear. I felt that I knew the world was crashing down any second on my shoulders. And I just kept, like we had talked about before, just kept going out, just kept getting after it to numb any
Mm.
all the feelings. And so I said, yeah, and I'm here. I said, I'm alive. I said, but I have a problem with drinking and I need to go get some help. And I did. I went to this place upstate called St. Christopher's. They call it the Miracle on the Mountain. And I went there, if I'm being completely honest, and I've talked about this openly so many times, I was thinking quick on my feet and in order to kind of hold on to the job, at least for another month
Mm-hmm.
or so.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's the first time I was in a meeting. It was the first time that they went around the circle, and I can remember it as clear as day when it got to me. I said, "I'm Gary, and I'm an alcoholic." And I had to say, it, and I was like, "Look at where you are now. Look at your life, buddy." I was 26 at the time, which is, it's young. I
That
was
is
super
young.
young, and but now you see younger people coming in. I didn't. They're so ahead of the game. I think it's so great. By the way, I just think I'm like, you guys are so ahead of the game. Keep coming back. It
Yeah,
changes a little
absolutely.
bit that way. But so there you are. So you can start getting some sobriety, start taking some of the suggestions and not doing it Arlina's way a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm sort of a all or nothing kind of gal, and I was 25 and I was all in. I was all in. They were like, all you have to change is everything. I was like, sign me up. Because I actually didn't want anything I had.
Love that.
I didn't want anything I had. And when I was growing up, I always wanted to be somebody else anyway. Right? I
Mm,
always had this feeling of like I don't belong. Like I don't get it. Everyone else seems to get it. I just felt, yeah, I just never felt like I really belonged anywhere. So when they said, you know, all you need to change is everything, I was like, just tell me what to do. Like, and I'm all in. So yeah, I found this gal. They said that I would need to get a sponsor, work with a woman, get a sponsor, and work the steps, and that's what I did. And I was terrified of the women because I saw women as competition, right? Like I was all about male validation. Like that's where I got all my self-esteem. And um, when they said that I had to work with women, I was terrified because honestly, I didn't think I had anything to offer. Like I had spent so much time and energy decorating the outside that I felt like I didn't have anything going on the inside.
right.
And I had been playing the chameleon for so long, I didn't even know who I was anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
But this gal remembered my name the second time she met me. Arlena is not an easy name to remember. I guess people never remember my name the second time they meet me. Um, but she did. And I was like, it was like the clouds had parted and the sun was shining. I was like, "Ah, this is gonna be this is the one." So, and you know how I asked her to be my sponsor? I asked her if she would listen to my inventory because I kept hearing that
Ah,
people were doing steps 1, 2, and 3 and relapsing, and I was terrified I was going to relapse.
yeah.
So I said, "Would you listen to my inventory?" And you know what she said? She said, "I would be honored." And that
Oh,
like, I know, it like reduced me to tears. She's like, "But we're gonna start with step one." Bless her heart.
it looks like you got a
So
good sponsor there at the beginning.
yeah, I really did. I got really lucky that I found good sponsorship right off the bat. It took me, I was going to meetings for a little while, just trying to get to know people
Mm,
but it was pretty early on that I connected with her, and she's like, "We're gonna meet. I'm gonna give you homework assignments, and you're gonna let me know, and I'll give you a deadline. But if you're not done, we're not gonna meet because there's the purpose of our relationship is to work steps, and I'll
wow.
take you through. Yeah, I'll take you through the steps the way that I was taken through the steps, and I think there were some other instructions that I don't really remember. I got sober in '94, so it's been a minute, and I try to sponsor the way she sponsored me, but it was done, she did it with such compassion and gentleness. She wasn't one of those hardcore,
Right.
super strict sponsors. She was very compassionate is how I felt about her. And so we met weekly, and she would give me my homework, I would do it, and then we'd agree to meet, and then I'm obsessively early, normally, not today. But
Oh, you're fine.
I'm so sorry. But I would show up and wait for her, and then she would show up. And I was always like amazed that she would show up. I don't know why that was such a big deal to me, but it was. She would show up, and then we would pray together sometimes. Sometimes she made me pray in public, which I was totally humiliated. But I was like, girl, you've been naked in public. You can pray in public. Like, that shouldn't be a big deal, right?
There you go. I like that.
Yeah. I told somebody one time. they're like, how come you don't drink anymore? And I'm like, I break out naked. And they handed me a drink.
Oh, I'm sure. Right. Oh,
I was
here.
like, note to self, don't say that to a man
I
ever.
used to, yeah, note to self. Yeah. I used to say
No.
break out in handcuffs. That was one of my
Yeah,
lines.
that's the other one you
Heard
hear
that
is you
one.
break
Yeah.
out in
I've heard
handcuffs.
that.
But
Yeah.
the only reason why I didn't get arrested was because I had dated a guy that was a DUI cop. And so when I was drinking and I would get pulled over, I would give them his business card along with my driver's license and they would let me go.
Oh, yeah.
4 times that happened.
Oh, boy.
I was
I know
so lucky.
a few times I didn't. I'm sure.
Uh,
Wow.
yeah, I was super lucky. But yeah, anyway, I digress.
So
So yeah.
94, is that what you said? You've been sober since 94.
Yeah, April 23rd of 94. I actually had my last drink on my 25th birthday earlier that year, but I was on the marijuana maintenance program for a little while.
That's
I didn't
California,
know.
California sobriety.
California, that's some bullshit. That ain't sober. But
Oh, that's what I mean. Yeah.
I know that makes some people mad, but and listen, I joke, but I do believe in harm reduction, and I didn't know that that's what I was doing, but that's what I was doing. I
Mm,
didn't have a sufficient substitute before I showed up to, the 12-step rooms.
yeah.
So I was managing my feelings with marijuana, and that's just what it was like. 5 months, about 5.5 months of that. And then I realized that I couldn't manage that either, and that needed to go too, because I couldn't. It was interesting because I would be, if I smoked weed, I would be like irritable, like restless, irritable, and discontent
Mm, sure.
afterwards, and I wasn't being the person. So when I finally got sober, I was dating this guy, and we broke up,
Mhm.
and I had to go live with my mom. I slept on her couch my first 30 days of sobriety because she was renting out my room.
Mm.
And so I had to sleep on the couch. As we broke up, I slept on her couch. Her roommate moved out, and then I was able to move into my room. But I was doing like 3 meetings a day and just doing all this stuff. But yeah, that was a really rough period. I think I had a point and I lost it.
No, it's all right. You bring me back my first year. Alls I had to, I said I was in and out for 4 years, but my sobriety date is May 13th, 2006. And from that
We were
point,
26 years old at the time.
I was 20. Well, now, no, now I'm 31 in '06. And '02 was the first day
Oh,
of,
okay.
I'm 26.
Okay, so you're still really young.
Yeah, the last time I had a drink or a drug or anything was May 13th, or May 12th. So May 13th, my first sobriety day, 2006. I haven't had a drink or a drug. It was also the first time I put 90 days together. So in between those 4 years of being in and out, even in the rehab, after rehab,
Uh,
I never put 90 days together. And so I was, whatever, it was my path. I was in and out. Was a lot of darkness in there. There was a lot of trouble.
yeah, that's rough.
Um, but from May 13th, '06, alls I did that first year, I worked in New York City, lived in New York City. Alls I did was go to work. In those days, they give you a pamphlet in the meetings, and
Did you get to keep your job?
I kept my job,
Wow.
and just as it would happen, I guess 60 days or so after, my sobriety date, I moved up and I started progressing within this firm. And I was there ended up being there, I guess, 12 years. And, it sprungboarded me into a career that I'm still doing today.
Is
Different
it
for,
true? Sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
I'm
no,
so
no.
curious. It's the interviewer. But I hear that that's a really heavy drinking culture. Is that true?
It's ridiculously heavy drinking culture,
Yeah, that's
but
hard to get
yeah,
sober in that
no,
environment.
it's funny. I even thought, like, when I was getting sober, I was like, okay, you talked about you were comfortable with the men and stuff, but I remember thinking, like, okay, everything I had done was just not working. I came in, I just didn't want to drink anymore. And I thought,
Yeah.
all right, all my boys, all my best buddies, they're gonna be gone. Like, because you mentioned like your identity, like it was who I was. I was
Mhm.
this partier, this maniac, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like, you didn't know what you were gonna get every time I drank. And I started turning people off as well. But I started going off my own. Like, I would pull Irish exits like
Mm.
all the time. I'd be out with people,
I,
and all of a sudden,
Irish
boom, I'd be
exit.
gone, and I'd be in some dark bar all by myself, and all I wanted was
Yeah.
a jukebox and no windows, and it was gross, but that's where I
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I thought my friends were gone. Number two, this industry I'm in, like my career is probably gone. Like, how am I going to go out and like entertain people? Like that's going to be impossible. But just like everything I thought I knew, Arlina, I was wrong. I was completely wrong. And I came in and I was sober and I just, everyone, the whole floor, it was a big floor, probably a few hundred people on this trading floor. They all knew I was in rehab. They all knew that, I was in and out. They kind of knew my story, I guess, in a way. I remember sitting there like, how am I going to do this? And like a couple of months into it, like some guys would be like, hey man, can I talk to you after work? I'm like, yeah, sure. And he's like,
Oh,
heard you're not drinking. I'm like, yeah, like, can you help me? I'm like, yeah, okay. And or someone else would walk by me and tap my chair and be like, one day at a time, right, man? I'm like, yeah. So here I think I'm like all alone. There's like 6 or 7 guys and their own journeys. And anyway, and as far as like my career and clients and things, I started I started doing better than I ever would have. Like if I was still out there and I did get to this desk and, maybe I would have done good for a little bit, but I would have completely blown it up, and that's at best. And so now I'm starting to get things that I didn't have before, things like integrity and responsibility. And I was talking about this morning, like, people talking about, I was like reading the promises and I just wanted the big bag of prizes and all the promises to come true. And I was like, the big bag of prizes our integrity, responsibility, being a good person in the community, people
yeah.
calling you for help. Like those are the bag of prizes. It's not the materialistic things. It took a while to get that, but Arlina, I couldn't even answer the phone for years into sobriety. So like, I didn't know who was calling me. I had anxiety every time my phone rang because I didn't know who was calling. Bill collectors, maybe it's police, whatever
Yeah.
it may be. And so, I say this a lot too. Like every time the phone rings, and this is, I'm going to go on 18 years, but every time the phone rings, like I have an instant jolt of like gratitude, like, boom, I can answer this call. I know it sounds silly,
Wow.
but it's all the little stuff that, I
Yeah.
was doing life. Like I was losing at life. Friends were getting married and starting families and buying houses. And I'm driving around the same beat up old piece of crap and, living paycheck
Mm.
to paycheck. And but things changed when I got sober, but started working on the inside, like we talk about
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
outside stuff, and that's where the beauty is. Like if I get a phone, like someone calls me, like it's happened recently, like my brother's in a hospital, he's drinking himself to death. What do I do? Wow, this is a great phone call to get. This is not a call I was getting 17 plus years ago, like, but these are the
Yeah.
you get
Nobody was
today.
asking you for help
Yeah,
before.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So where do you, I mean, so you get sober early too. Well, where does it become like so pivotal in your life where it becomes who you are and your livelihood and start your coaching career and things like that?
Yeah. Well, so I didn't go and I didn't like do any kind of work professionally in the addiction recovery space until like a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
Um, I had been working with a lot of women in the community, and I learned a lot during those times. I was like this obsessive learner. Like as soon as I got sober, I kind of went on this quest of like it was just endlessly fascinating to me, like what makes people tick.
Mm,
I went to this Tony Robbins. It was like a 30-day cassette, like improve your life type of thing. But I was introduced to this idea that if I changed the way I thought,
mhm,
like that everything centered in my thoughts. And I actually listened to that prior to getting sober. And I think that idea that if I changed my mind, I could change my life kind of really struck me. And then I
mm,
get sober and was exposed to this. I was just ready to change. I had to get, I was getting ready to get ready. And then when I was really ready to change, they kept saying you need to do the work. And I was like, what is the work? And really,
mm,
the 12 steps are largely a writing exercise, right? A writing and sharing.
mm,
And so I was ready to do the work. And what I was really grateful for was the fourth step in particular. It was the first time that I had an actual pragmatic process of doing self-examination, which was funny because I was so self-centered but incapable of self-examination. It's just that weird how we're like that. But but anyway, and I kept hearing that the 4-step, like people would, like I was saying, would do steps 1, 2, and 3 and learn relapse,
Right.
and I wasn't having it. I was like, that is not going to be me. I've heard statistics like, oh, only 1 in 100 make it their first go around. And I was like, that's going to be me.
Right.
I'm going to do all the things.
Love it.
Doing the 4-step was the first time that I got really specific about who, and it's so funny looking back. It's like, I don't know what I was afraid of. Like the 4-step is license to complain, right? Like you have a captive, you get to talk about how all these people hurt you,
Right.
right? Like, can I swear on this?
Yeah. Yeah. Go for it.
I was like, a license to bitch. This woman had to sit and listen to all my drama. And so, but I like wrote it all out first, right? So I got really, she goes, get really specific about the cause. Like, why are you angry? And
Yeah.
then how specifically did it affect you? So what I was learning was cause and effect. And then the last part is, we identified all the fears. It was all self-centered fear, right? Fear that
Right.
I wasn't going to get what I wanted, fear I was going to lose something that I had. And then the last part was, what was my role in this?
Right.
Like, life is about cause and effect. And I found out, it's so rude. We call this spiritual rudeness where I come from.
Mm.
But what I found out was that these people were mean to me in response to something I had done,
Mm.
to my selfishness and self-centeredness. And I was like, but I had such a kind and gentle, compassionate sponsor that we would talk about these things and we would get to the place where I had empathy for the people that I was originally mad at.
Mm.
Right. And it would soften my heart. And it was sort of like this humbling, not humiliating, but it was sort of a humbling experience to realize, oh, I was the asshole in that situation.
Right.
You know what I mean? I was like, oh, my bad. And
Yeah.
so that made later steps where you go to make amends much easier. I started to get clarity. I started seeing all these patterns of behavior. And I think what has been so fascinating for me over the 29 years, I've been sober 29 years, it's a long time.
Beautiful.
But what has been fascinating, it's like, why? Why was I like that? Why are we
Mm.
like this? And what I've come to understand that I had maladaptive coping skills, right? Because I grew up with trauma and
Right.
a lot of abandonment issues. I had really big feelings when I was growing up, and God bless my mom. She did not know what to do with me. She wasn't raised that way, and so she would often use anger to squish my feelings down. And so I never really learned how to process my feelings. And so I learned maladaptive coping skills. So that was what was at the root. And that's what I mean about I was handled with compassion and empathy, because it wasn't like, oh, you're just this jerk, right? It
Right.
was like, no, I'm this way for a reason.
Yeah.
If
There's a
there was a
reason.
reason, it's like, why am I like this?
Right.
And so and it's the difference between what's wrong with you and what happened to you. Those
Mm.
are two very different questions. And what happened to you it has the underpinnings of empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
And so that's how I was treated. I was treated with empathy and compassion. And then we talk about character defects in the sense of what those were like, what were my coping skills?
Right.
Right. And so it's been a process. This whole time in recovery has been about deconstructing those survival skills. What are the behavior patterns? Why do I have them? Where did they come from? What were the beliefs that were developed under those stressful, traumatic experiences? And what's the counter? What's the negative belief? And a lot of this is subconscious, by the way,
Yeah.
because we learn to dissociate from our pain at a survival, right? Your brain has this mechanism of dissociation. And so I wasn't feeling my pain. I was numbing it. That's what addiction really is about anyway. They
Right.
say, I've often thought that the purpose of addiction is distraction. So the question becomes, what are we distracting from? Right? What are we just, and then trying to resolve that at a root cause level. And so I learned the basics of this in 12 step, but then I was also so hungry for information that I was doing all kinds of therapies, reading all kinds of books. There was like all these spiritual teachers, really gifted therapists. I did all kinds of I did cognitive behavioral therapy. I did dialectical behavioral therapy, um, process therapy. I've done IFS, which is internal family systems, EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, reprocess. I like learned to reprocess some of those. And that's what kind of got me upset. And then I did hypnosis, and I did the hypnosis and as a client and had such a great outcome from that I was like, I need to do that too. And I also decided to become a sober coach because I saw that from doing the podcast, I saw that there were all these different ways to get sober.
Mm,
And it really opened my mind to, like, I didn't know, I was so insulated by 12 step that I didn't realize that there was such backlash about 12 step. And there were all these other ways that people were doing it. Cause I was kind of brought up in this idea that this way is kind of the only way.
yeah.
I think that was like sort of like left over from like religious teachings. That's kind of how religion is. It's like everybody thinks their way is the only way, but turns out no.
Right.
Turns out there's many ways. And so that's when I realized, not everybody is ready. I feel like we have to meet people where they're at.
Sure.
And so that's when I developed Sober Life School, which is sort of like the hub. It has like the podcasts and the classes and one-on-one
Right.
coaching and some resources. I just created this 30-day guide about how to quit drinking. It's your 30 tips for your first 30 days. So that's kind of the hub that holds everything.
That's the hub. I hear it. You brought up so many points that I was relating to. Excuse me. The first time I did, I wrote down the stuff about me, made step 4 and shared it with,
Oh man, isn't that eye-opening?
it's funny. You said something about, not ego. Like I was like, well, I'm not afraid of, write all your fears. And I was like, I'm not afraid of anything. Like, and I was the only person in history to walk into an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting with no ego. Really. But I'm laughing at myself, but I really,
Yeah.
that's how like blind I was about myself. That's why I had no idea who I was, and they're
Yeah.
like, who are you resentful for? And I had like, a handful of people, and I was like, what do you mean resentful? Like, tell me, like, and they said, okay,
Right.
write down any person, place, or thing that's ever pissed you off. I was like, wait a minute, like ever? Like, yeah, ever. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll see you in about a week. And I came back and I had like a stack of stuff. Like, this is how it
Yeah.
was. Like, people, like, I had a chip on my shoulder and I was a victim. And
Mm.
if you knew
Oh,
what I've been through or saw what I saw when I was a kid, you'd be worse than me. So, F you and and I was skeptical of everyone. But you talk about childhood trauma too, which is a topic I didn't, the childhood trauma, that even like that term, I've learned like in the past couple of years. This is way later in my sobriety.
you've been
It
sober
was
for a long time.
what's that?
You've been sober a long time.
Yeah, God willing. I mean, yeah, going on, and in May will be 18 years, God willing. And but this even came up recently about looking at my part, and I've done the steps, went through all the steps multiple times, then a couple of times, and kind of keep things fresh. I've had a few sponsors along the way,
Yeah.
um, but there was this event when I was a kid. It was at my house, and my parents would have some of these wacky parties and some like just not cool characters running in and out of the house. And I was like 10 years old and I came around the corner and there was a guy, I think he was smoking a joint. And then I was like, I kind of like called him out. I'm like, oh, I know what you're doing. And he freaked at me, like, and he scared the shit out of me. Like I was
Mm.
terrified. And it's not that event that he scared me, but I went back, into the house. I didn't say anything. But I felt like such a coward pretty much my whole life from
Yeah.
then on in for not standing up for myself. And
Hmm.
I'm certain that has led me, again, the event is the event, but it's the feeling that of feeling like a coward my whole life. I was like, I'm never going to feel that way again. If someone ever, says something to me, I'm going to stand up for
Mm.
myself. And, I overcompensated, if you will,
Right.
got in
Yeah.
a
That
lot of
makes a lot of
trouble, a
sense.
lot of assaults, a lot of fights, just chaos, but and it was brought to me just very recently. In fact, I was talking to a really special guy yesterday, and I was bringing up this, and he was talking about the inner child. It was it's kind of what he lives his life, and he helps other men. He was in prison for years, but he helps other men, and it's about dealing with the inner child. And
Yeah.
so I was like, all right, well, how about this episode? And I shared it with him. He's like, truthfully, he's like, you got to look and put yourself in his shoes for a second. You probably scared the shit out of him. You got this little young 10-year-old calling him out in the middle of a party. And he's like, so he got scared, and he's like, and you know what else? It's up to you, which this stuff I do know, but I just didn't put it into this example, if you will. He's like,
Mm.
you gotta forgive the guy. And by the way, the guy's dead. The guy passed away from HIV like a couple years after this event, but I still I still see his face. But even
Mhm.
talking to this man, the art of forgiveness, if you will. I don't know if it's an art, but to forgive him. Like, I'll put myself, if I was, 20 something years old and some little shit came up to me and started, hey, look what you're doing. I'd tell him to
Oh,
shut
yeah.
the
Yeah.
fuck up too, probably, but anyway, it's just,
Well, yeah, they call
forgiveness
that
to move
they
on.
call that reframing. So you're like reframing the experience. Like, what else could this mean? Right. And the thing is as much as I love the 12 steps, they're not trauma informed, right? They're not
Talk
trauma
about childhood
informed,
trauma.
which
I don't think at all.
and it's a peer support program. It's not run by professionals, right? And so we do the best we can to help each other out, but
Sure.
when it comes to like those deep issues, I think it's really important to bring in the professionals to help us like reframe and reprocess those experiences that shape who we are. So this experience that you had where I mean, I'm interpreting your experience, but it sounds like that was when you decided that that you weren't ever going to let anybody do that to you, and you developed this maladaptive coping skill, and it served you to keep you safe for a long time.
Sure.
And that's what these coping skills are meant to do, is to protect you. But
Right.
then, like you said, and even character defects are just instincts that are out of balance.
Out of balance. I mean, these are all survival, right, mechanisms, right? That
Yeah.
were that were that are intuition that we're developed, that are, like you said, are subconscious. I'm sure at all stages, correct? Like you develop them, you learn. You don't want to feel
Yeah.
certain ways again, right? And I
Yeah, you
totally agree
develop a
with what you
defense
said.
mechanism against that, but they're often not healthy coping skills. I mean, the things that save you in childhood don't translate to healthy relationships as an adult.
Right.
Yeah, like the
It didn't
defensive.
serve me well. No, I hear what you say. I think you're getting at where, yeah, you may have had this coping skill, but maybe, just maybe, it hadn't served you well for most of your life. And I think that's probably accurate. I do say, for multiple, events, that was one of them. There's other ones we can talk about, but like, developed this chip on my shoulder, and feel
Yeah, no
less than,
wonder, but no wonder.
yeah, no one, it's like that, it's like the scene from Goodwill Hunting. If you
It's
remember,
not your fault.
not your fault. No, he's like, no, I know. He's like, no, no, it's not your fault. Like when I saw that, Arlina, in that movie, I think I got filled up, like, because I just felt like
Yeah.
Will, like I was the kid, and I'm sure so many of us can relate to that scene, right? And it's a powerful scene.
I interviewed this guy. He's a world-renowned doctor at Stanford. Dr. David Spiegel, and he's like the world's foremost expert on hypnosis. And when I was doing my research on him, I was like, why do victims often feel guilty? Right? Like
Mhm.
in that, I would say that in that scenario, you were the victim in the sense that you weren't prepared to do battle with an adult, right?
Right,
Verbally or whatever, you were not
right,
prepared. But oftentimes, what comes out of those experiences is guilt and shame.
right.
And what I said, why do victims always feel guilty this way? Like rape victims, people victims of sexual abuse, like why do they feel guilty? And he said that it is way more difficult to feel powerless than it is to feel responsible, because nobody wants to feel vulnerable and powerless. And
Yeah,
so we often take on inappropriate responsibility. And that's why, that scene that you were describing from Goodwill Hunting, that scene hit me so hard,
yeah,
right? Because we all taking on inappropriate responsibility was something that came up in my four step, but turns out that's a pretty human we would rather feel it, the feeling of powerlessness and vulnerability is way harder than feeling guilty and responsible.
You know, all of my history of, therapies of all are in the rooms, all of them. Like it's been suggested to me many times to like go seek some, talk to some,
Professional help. Yeah.
yeah, because you got a lot of stuff in there, and
Yeah.
I think if I'm being honest with myself and you, it's probably because I'm fearful of what I'm going to discover,
Of
and
course.
but I
Of
say that
course.
because this topic has been up a lot. Like I'd say the last
Maybe it's
show.
time.
Yeah, maybe it's time to free myself of some of this. But even, to stay on the topic for a second more is, not only was I like I told myself like I'm never going to like feel that way. I'm always going to stick up for myself.
Hmm.
I was 10 years old. This guy's a grown man. Like I would have visions of like, and to the point of in tears, a little kid crying, like, I could take him. I think I can take this guy. I think like really
Wow.
visualizing like, if there's a way that I can get him, beat him up somehow. Like I was 10 years old. Like, you're not going to beat up a grown man. But the point is, you know, this is the mindset of a young boy. And it's leading me on the path that I went on, and
I highly encourage you to check out internal family systems. Internal family systems is parts work. So the basic premise is that we all have like these protectors, right? And so we address the protector. You have like this defensive protector in you, and the facilitator will ask you to. I do this with my clients too, but it's parts work. So you address the protector, get them to step aside, and then find out who it is that they're protecting. And I would imagine you have this 10-year-old self that's frozen in time inside you. And IFS is such a brilliant process because you get to address the 10-year-olds, you introduce yourself to them, you really hear from the 10-year-old how hard it's been. There is a process of unburdening that 10-year-old of the responsibility they took on to protect you. Just it's releasing the guilt and shame, and
mm,
then you bring them home. These little kids are like exiled parts; they're frozen in time,
yeah.
and they don't know that your higher self is, you're a grown ass man, you have resources, you have skills, you've developed different character traits and compassion, and you're a very resourceful person now, and you bring those little exiles home.
Mm,
Right. And then you can work with your protector part and say thank you for all the work that you've done. Like you don't have, like, typically these protector parts are exhausted. They don't even like their job. And so they get to relax. And so what ends up happening is you are in charge. It's
yeah.
like you don't get triggered by these. Whenever we have a response that's disproportionate to the situation, it means we're responding from a wounded child place.
Wow.
Right. And so that's the healing of this type of therapy, is that you relax those triggers and you get to respond from your true higher authentic self, not these little people or parts that are so scared.
Say that term one time because I've been told this not in those particular words, but my response has been disproportionate to
The
what's happened in
situation.
the situation like my entire life. Like,
Yeah, that means
okay,
you're just holding trauma. Like you have unhealed trauma. And it's like you've heard that idea that it's not your fault, that it is
mm,
your responsibility. And responsibility just means that you now have the ability to respond where you didn't before,
yeah,
right? Until that gets healed, you don't have the ability.
right.
So I feel like that's why it's so important to treat these little parts with empathy and compassion. It's just a sign of unhealed wounds. And it takes a lot of courage to do the work. And we just reach a point where, we just get sick and tired of all that stuff. But it's, this problem has a resolution.
I love
That
that.
has a resolution.
I
Yeah.
didn't expect you to help me so much today. I thought you were going to help my audience. So I thank you
I'm
so
a
much.
helper.
No, I can tell. I can tell. So, Arlina, where could we find you for people when I have a conversation similar to this free free session you just gave me, which was not part of the plan.
Dude, we didn't even do it. Like, yeah, if we want to book some time, we'll do a real IFS session. But
Yeah, I think that would
I have soberlifeschool.com.
Mhm.
And if somebody I just changed it. It flows a lot better now, but you can get like your free guide if you're just like at the beginning.
Mhm.
But I do offer private one-on-one coaching, and all there's like, it's been 3 phases, right? And so there's like setting the foundation where we talk about, how to establish a self-care routine, because all of this. So in my mind, I've come to understand that we only allow into our lives what we believe we deserve on a subconscious level. And so
Mm,
I'm all about addressing root cause. And so we kind of set the stage, the foundation for the first few meetings. And then we do a hypnosis session. It's like a guided meditation.
yeah.
And, all hypnosis is really self hypnosis. And I'm just like facilitating a guide. It's not like stage hypnosis where you see people acting like chickens. It's not, or doing weird stuff. It's not that. Um, but it's just a way to relax your mind so that we can reach these subconscious ideas, beliefs. It's really a belief system,
Uh,
right? And so we're reframing like that experience that you had,
mhm.
when your friend was like, "Oh, think about how the other guy felt." Well, that's a reframing experience where you kind of go back in time and you think, what else was going on? Well, there was somebody else there and they had their own feelings. And they were like, we were talking about an inventory. It's like that was a response to your initial action, right? There's a cause and effect. So the cause was, you scared. And so it's like, what, but it's done in a very loving and compassionate way. But so that's sort of the process of going back and trying to find out where these triggers were installed and reframing it so that we don't respond from that way. And then ongoing parts work, a lot of this stuff takes a little bit of time to heal. But I just feel like the combination of hypnosis and IFS type work really addresses root cause. Because even in long-term sobriety, you'll hear in the rooms people talking about whack-a-mole, which refers to, oh, I've been working on this one character defect and it seems to settle and then it pops up somewhere else. So I always think what that is a sign of unresolved trauma.
Mm,
It's unresolved trauma. And so I hear it kind of breaks my heart, but I'll be in a meeting and I hear people talking about that. And I'm like, that's unresolved trauma. People who can't get sober, who relapse a lot, that's unresolved trauma. And we need to be a little more open to suggesting and inviting people to seek professional help. But that's where my all my stuff is at Sober Life School.
soberlifeschool.com.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to that childhood trauma. I mean, that's where we keep circling back, right? Like under hypnosis or the guided meditation, like that's where we're trying to get to. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. The subconscious belief system. It's at the underpinning of everything that we do. All our feelings, thoughts, beliefs, it's all hidden in the subconscious mind. And so, we're blind to our own. It's like you can't read the label from inside the jar type of
Right.
thing. It's
Yeah.
it's like we're in it and we
I get
can't see it. We're dissociated from it. Your mind is a very amazing, tool. It protects you from like the worst things, but you have to feel it to heal it, right? And so sometimes it's very difficult to get to the traumatic experiences because your brain has it so locked away. And
Mm,
so through different types of therapy, that's healing root cause. It's important to have the addiction, using under control,
mhm.
not control, you know what I mean, though. That needs
Right.
to kind of you need to be stable. But a lot of times people need professional help in conjunction with something like 12 step to deal with the trauma so that they can stay sober. So I have a lot of and I feel like we need to do a better job in a 12-step community of being very cautious of what we say to somebody who relapses. This idea of you're not willing enough, you haven't surrendered enough, that is so cruel to say to somebody who really has no control over their underlying trauma.
What is the message to those people?
So
Like I had
you
a friend,
need,
he just went back out too. He's been sober 5 years. He just went back out. He's been out of work. He lost his job 6 months ago. He has a family. He's full of fear and he's not getting anywhere on the job front. And, he stopped going to meetings, stopped doing this, and he went back out. Now he came back in the rooms. He's been sober like 14 days. And, I personally, I always sincerely and very strongly admire those people that come back in because I say this a lot for myself. Like, I'm sure that
you
there's a,
did it too, huh?
well, yeah, I did it for in and out, but if I went, this would be totally different. Like, I'm sure that I have another drunk in me. Like, I don't know if I have another recovery in me. So those men and women that do go back out, but they come back in and they start counting days again. Like, I admire them so much. And you hear the saying like, oh, they're the most important, the newcomer is the most important person, in the room. And I always
Mhm.
thought like, okay, yeah, because they just got here and they're the most important. But the truth is, it's really for all of us because it really is one day at a time, but we all could go back out. Right. And so that message that, at least that's how I took it with him as well. And he's a good friend of mine. And so what is the message? I haven't heard anyone say, oh, you haven't surrendered enough. There have been complete compassion, but what is your message to those people?
Yeah. So the antidote to shame is empathy,
Mm,
right? And my suspicion, I don't know this person, but my suspicion is that there's some unresolved trauma there.
yeah.
He sounds like he lost his job. Like, what was going on with him that he wasn't able to perform at his job in the way that they needed him to? Like, what was going on with him?
That's a good question.
So my suspicion is that he has some underlying trauma that's unresolved, and it doesn't surprise me that it happened at the 5 year mark. There's these milestones that we've reached. It takes the brain a long time to heal,
Mm,
and oftentimes when we do a lot of work is when subconsciously the mind feels safe enough for the trauma to come up.
mm,
Right. So it's an interesting dynamic, but if we don't have help, sometimes that trauma can, cause us to relapse.
sure.
It's just so interesting. Like, I feel like my job is to help someone to feel safe, right? Because I understand that when someone feels safe, that's when they feel safe enough. That's when the trauma comes up. It's got to come up so it can come out. And a
Right.
lot of times that, all this stuff is an opportunity it's an invitation to go deeper, you
Yes.
know. And so this poor guy who is suffering, it needs, some professional help in conjunction with the community and support, because these professionals are not available to us 24/7, but the people in the program are.
Right. Right.
So it needs to be done in conjunction. But yeah, the message needs to be delivered with empathy and compassion.
Right. Love that.
Yeah.
Good. So I think I passed that test for him at least. That's what I've
Good
been,
for you.
yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been a pleasure. Soberlifeschool.com, correct?
Yeah, that's
And
it.
how about your socials? Where can we follow you on your socials? We're going to put this all on the meeting notes,
Awesome.
show
So
notes.
dry January is coming up. So I've been posting tips, at Arlina Allen on Instagram. And
Okay.
then I do share all my podcast episodes at ODAT podcast, ODAAT. It's so funny. I was telling, so I changed the name of my podcast probably a few years in. I started in 2016, and a few years in, I changed it because I didn't know that people outside of the 12-step community, I didn't know that people didn't know what ODAT meant one day at a time. And then some people spell it differently. Some people spell it ODAT, and some people spell it ODAAT. And I always spelled it this ODAAT.
Same here.
So
Yes.
I was like, this is a problem, but it was like too late. Now, we're several years in now. So now it's just one day at a time recovery podcast.
Gotcha. All right. We'll find you there. And tell us about where are you with the book?
So I've gone through a couple of drafts. So I'm in the process of sort of writing the epilogue, which is what, how life has been since I started it. And the book title has changed. It was the 12-step exploration guide. And when I got it back from the developmental editor, she's like, this is really a 12-step guide for skeptics. And I was like, oh, you're so right. Because I address all the things that, the reasons why people don't go, right? Like, oh, I'm not powerless.
Mhm.
Like this, oh, it's a religious program. I've heard people say it's a cult. It's a little culty, but in a good way. you know, this idea, some people don't like the idea of, turning your will and your life over, but there's a lot of caveats to that. Like, number one, it's powerless over alcohol, not over everything. We're
Right.
not powerless over. It's just alcohol. And I would argue that everybody is powerless over alcohol in the sense that when we ingest alcohol, there is a chemical chain of events that happens that we can depend on, which is why people do it in the first place. But like once you start consuming alcohol, you don't snap back to sober once. I mean, it takes a little time to wear off, but it's like that's not something that you can control. So I would call that powerless over alcohol.
Right.
Like once you ingest it, you don't, whatever.
Well,
And
some
so I
people
do
break out
go through.
naked, like you said, and some
Yeah,
people
yeah, yeah, yeah.
back
Bring
up.
out in handcuffs, naked, all kinds of drama. Your alter egos show up.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. Gotta keep that guy suppressed. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, listen, this has been a pleasure. I hope we do this again.
Absolutely.
Again, we'll put all of your socials and your website and everything on the show notes so they can come find you.
Thank you.
Arlina, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the work that you're doing too.
Thanks, Arlina. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for tuning in to another powerful episode of the Begin Again podcast. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. We hope that today's conversation has ignited a spark within you, affirming that recovery is not only attainable, but can also be a wellspring of strength and resilience. Our ultimate goal is to make a difference in someone's life every single day. By sharing these stories of redemption, we strive to empower you and inspire you to unlock your fullest potential, facilitate positive transformations, and contribute to creating a better future for yourself, for your loved ones, and the world at large. If you know someone who could benefit from listening to our show, please share it with them. And if you resonate with our mission and feel compelled to do so, we would greatly appreciate your support through a 5-star review, following us on Instagram, and subscribing to our YouTube channel, The Begin Again Podcast. The more positive reviews we receive and the wider our message spreads, the greater our collective ability to help others realize that change is possible in their own lives. Thank you once again for being a part of our community. May you be blessed on your own journey of personal growth and transformation.